A man who has nothing left doesn't give away his last chance at
He
survival.
traveled far to
That's what
find
everyone
you.
believed. That's what
What
made
is it
sense.
you seek?
But when Jake Morrison led that horse out of his barn at sunset, dirt coating his torn shirt and exhaustion carving lines into his weathered face, he didn't look like someone making a rational choice. In the distance, gunshots echoed across the valley like thunder, but Jake Morrison had stopped running toward trouble years ago. Until tonight. The two young women standing at the edge of his property shouldn't have been there. One leaned heavily against the other, blood darkening the fabric around her shoulder. They didn't speak. They didn't beg. They just watched him with eyes that expected nothing. As if they'd learned long ago that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. Jake had spent 4 months alone on that failing ranch. 4 months since the drought took his crops. 4 months since Elizabeth died of the fever, taking with her the last reason he had to keep fighting. And in all that time, the one thing he'd protected was Thunder, a Morgan horse worth $200 and a train ticket to California. But something about the silence between those sisters broke something in Jake, or maybe fixed something that had been broken for far longer. He gave them the horse. No words, no explanations, just unfastened the reins and held them out. The older sister, Maria, she'd whispered, stared at him like he'd handed her a loaded weapon. The younger one, Sophia, her shoulder wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, looked up with eyes that held pain beyond her 19 years. "Take her to Doc Martinez in Refugio," Jake said quietly. "Tell him Jake Morrison sent you." They took Thunder and disappeared into the falling dark, Sophia barely conscious in the saddle behind her sister. Jake stood in his doorway, watching until they vanished completely, and realized he'd made a choice that couldn't be unmade. What Jake didn't know was that someone had been watching from the ridge above, someone who'd seen everything, someone who would carry that image back to a camp where 40 vaqueros waited for word. And when dawn broke the next morning, the horizon changed. It filled with shapes, dozens of them, moving as one toward the ranch. Jake stood in his doorway, Winchester 1873 within arm's reach but untouched, watching them come. The thunder of hooves against hard earth reached him before he could make out faces, rhythmic and relentless like a cavalry charge. His throat tightened. 4 months of isolation, and now this. The riders moved in formation, disciplined and deliberate. These weren't raiders. These men rode with purpose. They slowed as they reached his land, spreading wider, encircling the property with military precision. Jake counted 20, then 30, then stopped counting. One rider broke from the formation, moving ahead of the others. The figure sat tall in the saddle, wrapped in leather and silver that caught the morning light. Behind him, the massive vaqueros held position, waiting. Jake forced himself to breathe, remembering lessons from dusty army camps. Panic gets you killed, boy. Stay present. The lone rider approached and dismounted. Jake stepped into the open where he could be seen clearly. If this was the end, he wouldn't meet it hiding. The vaquero walked forward, crossing into the yard. The sun-revealed features weathered by decades under the Texas sun. A man who'd lived hard and survived what lesser men couldn't. Maybe 50, with gray threading through black hair that fell past his shoulders. Scars marked his hands, but it was his bearing that commanded attention. He stopped 15 feet away. Jake waited, hands loose at his sides. "Why did you give them the horse?" the vaquero asked in careful English. Jake found his voice. "They needed it more than I did." The man's dark eyes narrowed. "You knew what giving away your last animal meant." "Yes, and you did it anyway." Jake said nothing, watching the older man's face. The vaquero stepped closer. "My name is Esteban Delgado. The women you helped are my daughters. Sophia would have died without that horse. They were being hunted by men who wanted them dead for what they'd seen." Jake felt something shift in his chest. "Are they all right?" Delgado's expression flickered with surprise before becoming unreadable again. Sophia is alive because of you. The bullet passed clean through her shoulder. She'll recover. The words hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. Delgado glanced back toward the vaqueros, then looked at Jake again. But that's not why I'm here, he continued, voice dropping lower. The men tracking my daughters aren't random bandits. Their leader is Samuel Blackwood, Captain Samuel Blackwood, formerly of the Union Army. Now he leads killers, and they're planning something that will get a lot of people dead. Jake's stomach dropped. What kind of something? Train robbery, murder, and enough stolen gold to start a war between Texas and Mexico. Delgado's jaw tightened. My daughters saw Blackwood kill Sheriff Williams when the sheriff discovered their plan. They want to rob the gold shipment coming through Copper Creek next week, money from the Comstock mines. And they know your daughters witnessed the murder. They know, and now they know you helped them escape. Delgado's hand moved to his pistol grip. Ready, not threatening. Blackwood's men were at your ranch yesterday, asking questions. They'll be back. Jake felt the weight of his choice settling on his shoulders. How many men does Blackwood have? 12, maybe 15. All experienced fighters. Delgado studied Jake's face. You have military experience. I can see it in how you stand. Jake nodded reluctantly. Sergeant, 3rd Cavalry. 5 years keeping peace between settlements and raiders. Good. You'll need those skills. Delgado gestured toward his men. I have 40 vaqueros who know how to fight, but Blackwood has advantages. He knows the territory, has contacts in town, and he's desperate. Desperate men do things rational men won't. What are you proposing? Partnership. You help us stop Blackwood and protect the gold shipment. In return, my family offers you protection and a place to start over when this is finished. Jake looked at the 40 mounted men watching with professional interest. These were fighting men who'd followed Delgado into whatever battles had marked their faces with hard wisdom. I don't have much to offer in a fight, Jake said honestly. 1 rifle, 30 rounds, and a ranch that's already dead. Delgado smiled for the first time. You have something more valuable than ammunition, Sergeant Morrison. You have the kind of conscience that gave away a man's last horse to save strangers. That's worth more than you know. Before Jake could respond, a shout went up from the perimeter. One outrider was galloping back, his horse lathered with urgency. Delgado turned toward the approaching rider, body tensing. The vaquero reached them and spoke rapidly in Spanish, gesturing north. Jake caught enough words. Riders, armed, heading this way fast. Delgado's expression darkened. He barked orders in Spanish, and the vaqueros exploded into controlled motion. Some rode toward defensive positions. Others checked weapons. Blackwood? Jake asked. Probably, which means they've been tracking us since dawn. Delgado looked at Jake with hardened eyes. Time to see if that military training still serves you, Sergeant. They're coming in force. Jake grabbed the Winchester from beside the door. The familiar weight brought back muscle memory from years he tried to forget. How many? Gonzalez says 12 riders, moving fast and spread wide. Classic cavalry formation for frontal assault. Delgado drew his Colt .45. They want to finish this quick. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off canyon walls. Through dust and heat shimmer, dark shapes became visible on the northern ridge. 12 men spread in a line that would hit the ranch from multiple angles. We can fort up in the house, Jake suggested, checking ammunition. Thick walls, clear sight lines. Delgado shook his head. Too easy to surround. Better to meet them in the open, where our numbers matter. He whistled sharply, bringing 2 of his best men close. Carlos, take 10 men and circle behind that ridge. When shooting starts, hit them from their blind side. Miguel, you and 8 others take position in the barn. Create crossfire. The plan was simple, effective, brutal. Jake admired the calm efficiency with which Delgado deployed his men. Where do you want me? Jake asked. Right here with me. In the open where they can see us. Delgado's smile held no humor. Sometimes the best way to spring a trap is to make yourself the bait. The approaching riders crested the ridge, and Jake got his first clear look at Captain Samuel Blackwood. Even at distance, the man's bearing marked him as someone accustomed to command. He rode center of his line, straight-backed and confident. Blackwood raised his hand, and his men halted within rifle range. The formation held for a long moment, both sides sizing each other up across 200 yards of scrub grass. Then Blackwood spurred his horse forward, alone, stopping halfway between the groups. His voice carried clearly in the still air. Esteban Delgado, send out the two women who saw something they shouldn't have, and everyone else walks away. Delgado stepped forward, matching Blackwood's exposed position. They're under my protection, Captain. Find another way to solve your problems. There is no other way. Blackwood's reply carried flat certainty. Those women are witnesses to a federal crime. I'm authorized to bring them in. Authorized by who? Jake called out, surprising himself. Because last I heard, former Union officers don't have authority except to drink themselves to death in frontier saloons. Blackwood's attention shifted to Jake. You must be the rancher, the fool who thinks helping fugitives makes him a hero. I think helping people makes me human, Jake replied. Something you might want to remember. Blackwood laughed without warmth. Humanity is a luxury men like us can't afford, Sergeant Morrison. Yes, I know who you are. Know your service record, too. You should understand the necessity of hard choices. The casual mention of his background sent ice through Jake's veins. This wasn't spur of the moment. This was planned, organized, thorough. The only thing I understand, Jake said carefully, is that you murdered a lawman and now you're trying to cover it up. Sheriff Williams died because he couldn't understand the bigger picture, Blackwood replied. Sometimes individual lives must be sacrificed for larger goals. The gold shipment I'm intercepting isn't just money. It's funding for railroad expansion that will bring prosperity to this entire region. By stealing it? By redirecting it to more worthy purposes. Blackwood's horse shifted restlessly. But I don't expect you to understand economic development complexities. Delgado cut through the exchange. Enough talking. You want my daughters, you'll have to go through me. If that's how you want to play this. Blackwood wheeled around, riding back toward his men. Remember, you chose this. The next minutes unfolded with terrible inevitability. Blackwood rejoined his line, raised his arm, and brought it down like a blade. 12 riders charged forward, splitting into 3 groups. Classic pincer movement designed to overwhelm defensive positions. Jake had time for one clear thought. Delgado's men better be as good as they looked. Then the world exploded into gunfire and chaos. The first volley from Blackwood's men kicked up dirt around Jake and Delgado, who'd taken cover behind a water trough. Jake returned fire with his Winchester, the familiar rhythm of aim, fire, work the lever taking over from conscious thought. His first shot took down one of Blackwood's riders. His second went wide, but the third caught another raider in the shoulder, spinning him around. Delgado's Colt barked repeatedly, each shot precise and economical. Jake watched the vaquero leader work and understood why 40 men followed him into situations like this. The crossfire from Miguel's group caught Blackwood's left flank by complete surprise. 3 riders went down in the first exchange, horses screaming and bolting. The surviving members tried to wheel around but found themselves caught between 2 firing positions. Carlos's flanking maneuver proved even more devastating. His 10 vaqueros hit Blackwood's rear guard just as the main assault reached peak intensity. Caught between forward momentum and unexpected resistance from behind, Blackwood's attack dissolved into confusion. But Samuel Blackwood hadn't survived years of warfare by being easily rattled. Jake watched the former captain rally his remaining men, redirecting them toward defensive positions behind a natural rise. He's good, Jake admitted, reloading with practiced efficiency. Yes, Delgado agreed grimly, which is why this isn't over. Gunfire died down to sporadic exchanges as both sides settled into covered positions. Jake counted 3 of Blackwood's men down permanently, with at least 2 others wounded. On Delgado's side, one vaquero had taken a bullet through the leg but remained functional. "We have them outnumbered now," Jake observed. "Numbers don't matter if they achieve their real objective," Delgado replied. "This attack isn't about winning. It's about buying time." Time for what? For the rest of Blackwood's gang to position themselves around Copper Creek. While we're fighting his advance guard here, his main force is probably setting up for the train robbery. Delgado's expression was grim. He's willing to sacrifice these men to keep us busy. The realization hit Jake like cold water. They were fighting the wrong battle while the real crime was being prepared elsewhere. "How long until that train arrives?" Jake asked. 18 hours, maybe less. Jake looked at the tactical situation. Blackwood's remaining men dug in behind good cover, his own side scattered across defensive positions. Everyone low on ammunition. Even if they won this fight, it would take hours. And hours they didn't have. Before Jake could voice his thoughts, a new sound cut through the afternoon air. Hoofbeats coming fast from the south. Both men turned, weapons ready, until they recognized Maria Delgado riding toward them on a lathered horse. She dismounted while the horse was still moving, running toward her father with urgent desperation. The rapid Spanish that followed was too fast for Jake to catch, but Delgado's face grew steadily darker. "What is it?" Jake asked when the exchange ended. "Sophia remembered something else about what she saw at the trading post," Delgado said grimly. Blackwood wasn't just meeting with his gang. There were 3 men in expensive suits, territorial officials from Austin. They were discussing how to blame the train robbery on Mexican bandits, use it to justify military actions south of the border. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about stolen gold. It was about manufacturing a war. "Who were the officials?" Jake asked. Maria answered in English, voice tight with controlled anger. "Deputy Territorial Administrator James Hartwell, Colonel Marcus Steele from the Adjutant General's office. The third was someone they called Judge. I didn't catch his full name." Jake felt blood drain from his face. He knew those names. Every former soldier in Texas knew those names. These weren't corrupt small-town officials. These were men with power to mobilize territorial militias and federal troops. "They're planning to use the robbery as pretext for land seizures," Jake said slowly. "Blame it on Mexican raiders. Justify military occupation of the border region. Grab thousands of acres of valuable grazing land." Delgado nodded grimly. "My family has holdings on both sides of the border. We're not the only ones. If they succeed in starting this war, dozens of families will lose everything. Then we stop them," Jake said with quiet certainty. "Whatever it takes." A gunshot from Blackwood's position reminded them the immediate tactical situation hadn't changed. They were still pinned down, still running out of time. But now Jake understood the stakes. This wasn't about helping 2 strangers anymore. This was about preventing a war built on lies and paid for with innocent blood. Just then, Maria pulled a folded telegram from her shirt. "This arrived at the Refugio Telegraph office this morning. A friend brought it when he saw you'd helped us." Jake unfolded the yellow paper. It was addressed to him, sent from Austin. "Deputy Marshal Tom Harrison investigating Sheriff Williams' murder. Stop evidence found at trading post confirms foul play. Stop riding to Copper Creek with federal warrant. Stop arrived on tomorrow. Stop hold positions. Stop." Jake's hands shook as he read. Someone had been ahead of them, building a case. "Harrison's coming," Jake said, "but he won't arrive until after the train robbery unless—" "Unless what?" Delgado asked. Jake smiled, feeling something stir in his chest that had been dormant since Elizabeth died. Purpose, maybe. Or just simple clarity that came from finally knowing which side you were on. "Unless we make sure Captain Blackwood is exactly where Harrison expects to find him," Jake said, "at the scene of his crime, with all the evidence he needs. The plan they hatched in the next hour was part military strategy, part desperate gamble. Instead of trying to prevent the robbery, they would let it begin, then spring a trap that would catch not just Blackwood, but the corrupt officials backing him. "Miguel," Delgado called to his lieutenant, "how many men can you spare for a special assignment?" "Depends on the assignment, Jefe. The kind that involves a train, several dozen armed thieves, and enough evidence to hang a territorial administrator." Miguel grinned, transforming his scarred face into something anticipatory and dangerous. "For that kind of assignment, I can spare 10 of my best men." As the sun began to set over Jake's failed ranch, three groups prepared for missions that would determine whether justice or corruption ruled this corner of Texas. Maria would ride back to meet Harrison and guide him to the right place at the right time. Miguel and half the vaqueros would maintain their positions, keeping Blackwood's advance guard pinned down. And Jake Morrison, former sergeant turned failed rancher, turned reluctant hero, would ride toward Copper Creek with Esteban Delgado and 10 of the hardest men he'd ever seen. Thunder was waiting for him at the horse line, saddled and ready. Delgado had brought the Morgan back, recognizing that a man needed his horse for the kind of work they were about to attempt. "Thank you," Jake said quietly, running his hand along Thunder's neck. "Thank me when this is over," Delgado replied. "Thank me when my daughters are safe and Blackwood is in chains." Jake mounted Thunder, feeling familiar comfort of good horse beneath him and clear mission ahead. For the first time in months, he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. "Let's go stop a war," he said. They rode toward Copper Creek under a sky painted with sunset colors, 12 men against an army of corruption, carrying nothing but weapons, determination, and the kind of desperate courage that sometimes changed history's course. The train pulled into Copper Creek Station at 6:47 a.m., 17 minutes behind schedule due to a track washout 30 miles east. Jake Morrison watched it arrive from his position atop the grain elevator, borrowed spyglass letting him count guards in the special car holding Comstock gold. 8 men visible, probably 4 more inside. Professional railroad security, armed with repeating rifles, and the alertness that came from knowing their cargo made them targets. What they didn't know was that Captain Samuel Blackwood and 15 men were positioned in rocks above the water stop 3 miles west, where the train would pause to refill its boiler. What Blackwood didn't know was that Jake and Delgado's men had spent the night rigging that water stop with enough evidence and witnesses to hang him. And what none of them knew was that Deputy Marshal Tom Harrison was at that moment riding toward Copper Creek with a federal warrant and enough backup to handle whatever they found. Sometimes the best plan was the one that lets your enemies defeat themselves. "Positions, gentlemen," Jake called softly to the vaqueros, spread across rooftops around the station. "Our guests are about to make their entrance." The train whistle echoed off canyon walls as it pulled away from Copper Creek, heading west toward the ambush that would change everything. In the distance, smoke rose from the mountains where Blackwood waited with his men, confident that today would make him rich and powerful. Instead, it would make him a prisoner. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the desert, Jake Morrison thought about the choice he'd made just 2 days ago. He'd given his last horse to 2 strangers and started a chain of events that led to this moment, perched on a grain elevator, surrounded by men who'd become family, waiting to see justice done. When the shooting started 3 miles west, exactly as planned, Jake knew they'd won. Not just the battle, but something bigger. Something that meant families like the Delgados could keep their land, their dignity, their lives. Thunder waited below, saddled and ready for whatever came next. But for the first time since Elizabeth died, Jake Morrison wasn't running toward anything or away from anything. He was exactly where he belonged, with people who'd chosen him as surely as he'd chosen them. The sound of gunfire faded in the distance, replaced by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, Deputy Marshal Harrison and his men, riding hard toward justice. Jake Morrison smiled, checked his Winchester one last time, and settled in to watch the end of Captain Samuel Blackwood's war. Some things, he reflected, were worth giving up your last horse for. Some things brought you everything you never knew you needed, wrapped up in choices that seemed like endings but turned out to be beginnings. The rest, as they say, is history. But this story, Jake's story, was just getting started.